For Calm is Contagious Session 7. My name's Jeremy Stretton, for those of you who don't know me, and I've got with me Ash Rees from Ray White Northern Corridor. Welcome, Ash. So, sorry we're a bit late, a few technical issues. We just wanted to talk about today the announcement last night from the Queensland Government about the changes to the commercial tenancies and retail tenancies regulations. So I've got a bit of a presentation that I'll share. Which will come up now. So yeah, there's just a nice slide with a picture of Ash and I on it. Let's move through. So yeah, what's changed? I think just before I go into what's changed, I'll talk briefly about what the legislation was. And you know, for anyone who is a commercial tenant or a commercial landlord or a retail shop tenant or landlord, you'll probably know that the Queensland Government introduced some legislation a few months ago about how the leases were to be dealt with that were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And there was a bunch of rules that came in. We've done previous sessions, Ash and I, and the other Calm is Contagious hosts about these changes. And these are really extending upon that. So this all got announced yesterday. So basically the first thing is that landlords can't take action against an affected tenant until the 31st of December, and that should be 2020, not 2021. I'll have to change that one. Actually, I'll go on there and change it right now, just just so that that's clear. For 2020 to the end of 2021, and this change is all about making sure that for tenants who have been affected by the pandemic and had their business affected, that landlords can't go and kick them out of their premises before the end of the year. Now, if there's a pre-existing breach from the tenant, or if the tenant has failed to comply with their obligations under, an arrangement's been put in place under the COVID legislation, then they can be kicked out. But if it's just for failure to pay rent for the agreement that before an agreement was reached, then landlords can't take them out. They can't call on their bonds. They can't do all those things. They can only just come to an agreement under the under the COVID-19 regulations. So the second point is that tenants can actually request a further reduction in rent from the landlords. Now, the deal that was done is still in force from the beginning, and I'll get into that in a second. But landlords can request a further rent reduction from the landlords. There is now no minimum 50% waiver requirement. So the previous rules and legislation talked about that a landlord had to waive a minimum of 50% of the rent, and they've actually got rid of that, and they want landlords and tenants to come to agreements together. They don't want to rely upon the landlords, on landlords been having to have a minimum of a 50% rent waiver. That's what's got to be agreed to. There's got to be an agreement between the parties. And the last thing that that's really changed is that the mediations with the Queensland Small Business Commissioner, they were going till today, the 30th of September. Those have now been extended out to the 31st of December. And just to explain that for anyone who isn't aware, if a landlord and tenant can't agree, then they can go and have a free mediation that's conducted with the Queensland Small Business Commissioner. And so those will continue. They were meant to end now, but those have been extended through so that people can come to an agreement. What hasn't changed? A lot of this hasn't changed. So you need to be eligible for the JobKeeper arrangements. So anyone who's affected would know this. The new legislation came in for JobKeeper. Will come in tomorrow, the 1st of October, and the new rules and requirements. And you need to meet certain thresholds for reduction in turnover as a result of the pandemic. And if you meet those thresholds, then you're still entitled to JobKeeper going forward for the next 3 months. But you need to be entitled to JobKeeper for the next 3 months, not just previously being entitled to it. So you need to be eligible for it going forward. And I said this before, but I think it's a really important point to make, that any agreement that you made for the previous 6 months still applies. Nothing changes for that. Those agreements are still in force and are unaffected. So we have seen a few cases, unfortunately, where tenants still aren't able to pay rent. They can either renegotiate or maybe the lease just isn't for them, and the lease needs to be terminated. So if you've already reached an agreement, then that's great. They're still enforceable and they're unaffected. The last one is that the landlords still have to make the offer from to the tenant in relation to the reduction in turnover and what that rent reduction will mean. And at the end of the day, that's what still needs to happen between the parties. The big thing that I took away from this is that the government in the legislation and the rules, they really want people to negotiate. They really want tenants and landlords to sit down together and negotiate. They don't really want to tell us what to do, and you can understand why. Like the changes to not having to have a 50% waiver of the reduction kind of makes sense, because landlords and tenants the government wants landlords and tenants to come to agreements that are fair and reasonable to them. I watched something with the Small Business Commissioner last night, where she mentioned that I think that they've had about 2,000 inquiries and only about 100 actual mediations of the disputes. So people are coming to agreements, and that's what they actually want. They don't really want to come to us to have to come to them with an agreement. So do what's fair and reasonable. And if everyone can do what's fair and reasonable and come to an agreement to get through this, then that's going to be the best situation for everyone. So that's just a brief little outline from me. There's Ash and my details, but Ash, I think you've got some questions about this. So do you want to just fire any questions you got for me on this, and then we can give people that information.
Couple of questions and just a couple of observations from my side. I'd agree that how well the tenants and owners have cooperated up until now has been really kind of reassuring, I guess is the word. We've had very few, I think we've got 400 and something properties under management, very few that have gone to any kind of combative element. The financials element has been the frustration I think everyone's experienced through this, trying to get the financials right. And even now, with this announcement kicking off tomorrow, we're going to have financials in play, because the response period definition was one thing I wanted to check with you on how what that means for people. Is that did it exist? Has it extended?
Yes. So the response period was the 1st of April through to the 30th of September. What they've done, and I've got the amended rules right here, is that they've redefined that to also include an extension period. And so they've given the extension period is defined as beginning on tomorrow, the 1st of October, and expiring on the 31st of December. So the response period, so the way that it reads now is response period plus extension period, but that in effect means to the 31st of December.
Yeah. This year,
not next year. Unlike my slide that I accidentally...
Hopefully that's the worst Nostradamus prediction ever. Yeah, and we're still not talking about this, but
fingers crossed.
on the topic of predictions, though, obviously JobKeeper 2.0 has a 3.0 through to end of March. Mm-hmm. How likely do you see this getting a New Year's Eve announcement for an extension?
Well, hopefully they'll tell us before New Year's Eve, before the Christmas period, because most people go on holidays for that period. However, if they don't, we will update everyone at that time, because no one can go away anyway, not very far. But we will update everyone. I think it's very likely is the answer to that question. The rules that have been brought in are all based on the National Cabinet's Code of Conduct for Commercial and Retail Leases that was released right at the beginning of the pandemic. And the thing that is very clear in that document is that those principles are to apply for the period of the pandemic and for a reasonable period thereafter. So as we sit now on the 30th of September, it appears that all of Australia's got this thing under control again. The Victorian numbers seem to be encouraging. Queensland, where we are, doesn't seem to have that, hasn't had any community transmission for like 20 days or something. But the rules talk about the pandemic period and a reasonable period thereafter. So my view is, even if things continue the way that they're going, JobKeeper is there for until the end of March, because the federal government sees the economy being affected by COVID-19 until at least then. And so I think it would be sensible for landlords and tenants to think about this as a long-term thing through to March. And where you've got a tenant, I'm speaking to the landlords now, where you've got a tenant who is affected by this and is struggling, then I think it's reasonable to assume that this legislation will continue through to March. We will update everyone, closer to, well, as soon as the announcement's made. We do keep a pretty close eye on all of this stuff to make sure that we update our viewers about what's changing. But yeah, I think there's a very, very good chance that it'll go through the 31st of March.
Yeah, we've seen almost every stimulus reaction has been extended through the process, and they've made it very clear that one thing they're not going to have is a cliff at any point. So I think we can assume an overly cautious approach at each, as they come to the finish line on each one of these. Any tips you're thinking on, because this new setup is a whole lot more open to negotiation now, isn't it? With before it was fairly clear 50-50 deferral to waiver on the amount that your business has decreased. As long as you qualified, then it was a pretty clear path. Do you see this coming as an issue? Or?
Look, I don't think so. I think what we've seen is landlords and tenants be pretty reasonable with each other in most cases. I think though that the thing to remember is that if you take a hardline stance, the tenant, if either side take a hardline stance, the only remedy is to go before the Small Business Commissioner and go and have a mediation. And those mediations will be fair and you'll all be heard. But at the end of the day, you still have to come to an agreement one way or the other. And they're going to require, I know a number of the mediators, and I know, been following what's been going on with the Small Business Commissioner, and they want a reasonable response. They just want people to be reasonable. And if you're not reasonable, then they're going to tell you you're not being reasonable, and they're going to strongly encourage you to come to a resolution. Because if you can't, then you got to go to court, and that costs you even more money. You end up paying us lawyers lots of money to get a result that you could have got if you just came to a mediation. So I wouldn't be encouraging anyone to go down that path unless it's 100% necessary. Yep. But just be reasonable and just come to a fair agreement. Make sure that if a tenant's showing you their financials, again, talking to landlords, if tenants are showing financials and showing that they can't afford their rent and that's reasonable, then come to an agreement with them, because you'll help them through it and you'll do a good job. From a tenant's point of view, and I've seen some tenants who won't provide information, who won't do the right thing or think that they can get more than they're actually entitled to. If you think you're entitled to more and the landlord or their agent is telling you they're not, they're probably right. Go and get some advice from someone who knows what they're talking about, and you'll probably find that they are right. And just be fair and reasonable. This isn't an opportunity to make more money and to pull one over someone else's eyes. This is about everyone working together to come to a fair resolution, and everyone's going to make sure that that's actually what happens. So I have seen it, and I know that the people who are part of our Karma's Contagious series aren't those people, but if anyone else is watching this, this isn't an opportunity to try and get one over on a landlord or a tenant. This is an opportunity to work together to come through on the other side with a business that's still operating and doing that. And just be fair and reasonable, and make sure that you're actually helping people get through it.
One other variable on this now is, do we know what's happening with loan deferrals?
So the banks haven't, as far as I have seen, the banks haven't announced any further loan deferrals. I would say, once again, though, that the banks, they did that by themselves. So I would imagine that there'd be, I must say, I did hear one of equipment finances of one, we'll call it one of the big four, offering further negotiations if necessary. So the banks, there was never any, as I understood, there was never any direction from the government or legislation that said you have to give extensions. I think the banks just did that once again because they recognized the fact that they were going to lose a bunch of money if they didn't do it. I think that if you do have problems with paying loans, talk to the bank. Go and see your bank manager. They don't want to. No one wants to be seen to be the pariah hurting business owners through this. They want to help people out. So I think that just take that attitude and go and negotiate, and most people are going to do the right thing. If anyone heard that bark, I think that was Ash's dog in the background.
Yep, correct.
Ash is still working from home. I've come into the office today. So all good.
That was all the questions I had, but those bank details are going to be something that we'll have to factor in when it comes to the deferral and the thing. If the owners are having to go back to paying full repayments on the properties, then there's going to be some give and take in all of this. So
there has to be, and that's the same too as like land tax payments and all the rest of it. I haven't seen anything announced about that as yet. And so at the moment, it's just a wait and see. But people just be fair and reasonable. Look at the whole picture. Make sure you come to a reasonable resolution between the parties.
Yeah. Positive news from our side at the coalface with the property across the Northern Corridor. The recovery, we've had two patches that of drop and recovery. I'll actually will share this, Jeremy. I've got a quick summary I was looking at before, which is just a good graph that shows our inquiry since the start of January. So really clear, fell off a cliff as we would expect when COVID hit. And there was a second one when in this patch here when the Melbourne restrictions came into play. So it has recovered again, but the encouraging thing for me through this whole stretch with the rebound was all of the inquiry was almost all of it, industrial, office, retail, was all pretty well spread. It wasn't a whole lot of tenant and investment, which we kind of expected a flood of, kind of opportunistic, also known as bottom feeding buyers coming into the market to try and pick up some bargains. But this rebound period was purely businesses responding to their new COVID situation and having to expand to facilitate the new way of operation. So it was a good, just a good observation for us that we saw through that time, and it's been maintaining pretty well since.
Yeah, cool. All right, just before we finish up, I will just once again just share this slide. It's got Ash and my email addresses. Just once again, if you're watching this, feel free to reach out to us if you've got any questions. We're happy to help out and help as much as we can. If you are watching this on the replay, because we are sending this out to the people who normally attend the Calm is Contagious webinar series. Once again, feel free to contact us, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have or help out where you need to. So Ash, mate, if there's nothing else, let's finish up, and yeah, just if people need to get in contact, just do so, and we'll go from there.
Perfect.